In this video, I do a comprehensive set of scientific tests on the Huawei Watch 3. First, I test the quality of the sleep tracking against a scientific EEG monitor. Second, I'll check the heart rate accuracy. Third, I'll evaluate the SpO2 or oxygen saturation measurements. Fourth, I'll take a look at the GPS accuracy. And finally, I'll do a step counting test. As always, I do not want to waste your time, so timestamps are in the description below and also on the timeline. Hello everyone. For those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. Before getting to the test, I'd like to provide the most important background information on the Huawei Watch 3 in under 45 seconds. The Huawei Watch 3 has many sensors: an acceleration sensor, gyroscopic sensor, geomagnetic sensor, optical heart rate sensor, ambient light sensor, barometric pressure sensor, and temperature sensor. It can connect to Wi-Fi and has GPS, NFC, and Bluetooth connectivity. It has a speaker and microphone and is water resistant up to 5 atmospheres. It uses all these features to measure your sleep stages using the Huawei True Sleep algorithm, and it can measure your heart rate, SpO2, steps, and skin temperature. The ultra-long battery life mode is 14 days, but Huawei indicates that with normal usage, a single charge should last around 3 days, though this might be less when you pair it with an iPhone. It also has eSIM cellular calling, meaning it allows you to activate a cellular plan from your carrier without having a physical SIM card. However, my channel is not so much about listing features. Instead, on my channel, I try to test the accuracy of different measurements. In this video, I'll do a set of scientific tests, and since I'm in a unique position to test the accuracy of the sleep tracking algorithm, I want to start off with the sleep test. For the sleep comparison, I wore the Huawei Watch 3 to bed for 10 nights, and at the same time I wore either this portable scientific EEG device or this consumer EEG device. And I recorded myself using an infrared camera. The EEG devices can actually measure your brainwaves and muscle movements and are therefore ideal for measuring your sleep stages. Now, I normally just use this scientific EEG device called the ZMax, for which I can access the raw data and manually evaluate each of the individual nights. In a scientific paper, it was shown that the Dream 2 headband seemed to work really well. Now, I manually went through the recording of the scientific EEG device and scored each part of the night for the different sleep stages. I also loaded the data from the watch and the Dream 2 EEG device into the coding language I use. Now, to the results I obtained. Let's first have a look at the accuracy over the 6 nights during which I wore the scientific EEG device. We'll start by looking at the individual nights, after which we will calculate some statistics. Here we see the first night I recorded. On top you see the sleep stages as they were recorded using the EEG device. Along the horizontal axis we have the time of night. On the vertical axis you have the different sleep stages, that being deep sleep, light sleep, REM sleep, and awake. On the bottom you can see a similar plot, but now for the sleep stages as they were recorded using the Huawei Watch 3. If we first look at deep sleep according to the EEG device, which are marked here in purple, we see a partial overlap between the Huawei Watch 3 and the EEG device. The Huawei Watch 3 detected some of the deep sleep segments, though definitely not all of them. It also detected a lot of extra deep sleep that was not really there, as you can see both in the beginning and especially later in the night. Light sleep detection is not great, as marked here in cyan. Some of the light sleep was indeed detected as light sleep by the Watch 3, however a lot of it was also detected as deep sleep and REM sleep. REM sleep detection was also not great. Most REM sleep was not correctly detected as REM sleep, as you can see marked here in red. To see the sleep cycles, I added non-REM sleep in blue and again marked REM sleep in red. Each sleep cycle starts with a combination of deep sleep and light sleep, together called non-REM, and always end in REM. I would say that based on just the data from the Huawei Watch 3, I would not be able to see the sleep cycles, though one could argue that if the REM sleep of the Watch 3 is slightly shifted, you could see some of the sleep cycles, at least to some degree. Awake detection, as marked here in green, is pretty okay. Both of the awake modes I had were correctly detected. This is the second night I tracked. First, looking at the beginning of the night, we can see that the Huawei Watch 3 detected me falling asleep about 30 minutes too late, which is not great. If we next look at deep sleep, we see that most of what was deep sleep was also marked as deep sleep by the Huawei Watch 3. However, a lot of extra deep sleep that was not really there was detected throughout the night. Looking at light sleep, marked here in cyan, we again see a pretty poor match, with a lot of sleep marked as light sleep actually being deep sleep, REM sleep, or awake time. REM sleep detection is also not great, with a lot of the REM sleep seemingly randomly distributed throughout the night, which also means we can definitely not see the sleep cycles for this night. Awake detection, again marked in green, is pretty good, with my awake moment correctly detected. Now the other 4 nights basically show the same result. I just wanted to show you the awake detection during these nights, since this was a bit hit and miss. Especially for this night here, you can see that the Huawei Watch 3 detected long awake moments that were not really there, as you can see here and here. Also at the end of the night, I was in a period where sleep was interspersed with awake moments, and the Watch 3 fully detected this as me being awake. For this night here, we see even worse awake detection, where a large part of the nights were detected as me being awake, while I was actually still sleeping, as you can see here and here. Some nights were better though, like this one here. Though for this night here, we actually see it missed some of my awake moments. So far, this is not looking good for the Huawei Watch 3. Most sleep stages are actually tracked pretty poorly. To get an even more objective view of the results, let's calculate some statistics regarding the consistency between the sleep stages of the Huawei Watch 3 and the EEG device. However, first a quick side note. If you're interested in the latest updates on the wearables I'm testing, consider subscribing to my Instagram and my weekly newsletter. Of course, you would also make me really happy if you subscribe to this YouTube channel. Now enough self-promotion, let's see what the overview statistics say. First, let's look at the total percentage of each sleep stage the EEG device and the Huawei Watch 3 predicted. Here I displayed those percentages for the EEG device on the left and the Huawei Watch 3 on the right. Overall, these percentages do not agree very well. The Huawei Watch 3 only predicts roughly the correct amount of REM sleep. It predicts way too much deep sleep and almost triple the amount of awake time. However, we already saw based on the individual night that the timing of these stages is also vital. Therefore, more important even than these total percentages is checking if the Huawei Watch 3 predicts the correct sleep stages at the right time. And that is what I displayed here. On top we have the sleep stages according to the EEG device, and on the left the sleep stages according to the Huawei Watch 3. Now each column here sums to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each of the actual sleep stages was recorded as each sleep stage by the Huawei Watch 3. All sleep stages that are correctly predicted will be on the diagonal of this matrix, which I will highlight in green as I'm explaining the results. First of all, we see that about 60% of what was deep sleep was also correctly predicted as being deep sleep. However, it was quite often confused with light sleep, REM sleep, and sometimes even with awake time. Light sleep detection was not very good, with less than half of the light sleep correctly predicted as being light sleep. It was most often confused with deep sleep, but also with REM sleep and awake time. REM sleep detection was by far the worst. Only 23% of what was REM sleep was also correctly predicted as being REM sleep. Most of what was REM sleep was actually predicted as being light sleep by the Huawei Watch 3. Awake detection was also not very good, with only 43% of awake times correctly predicted. A lot of awake time was actually judged as being light sleep and REM sleep. So the accuracy of the sleep tracking is not very good. The question is, do we get the same results when using the Dream 2 EEG headband as a reference device? I'll not go into the same level of details before, but I'll highlight the most important results. I wore both the Dream 2 headband and the Huawei Watch 3 for 4 nights. Here we see a similar confusion matrix as before, but now with the Dream 2 headband as a reference. Again, we see that deep sleep detection is not great, with only 56% of the deep sleep correctly detected. In addition, as we look at the individual nights, we again see a lot of extra deep sleep is detected. As you can also clearly see during this night here, and also finally during this night right here. Deep sleep was actually mostly confused with awake time. However, part of this is likely because in a single night it detected me as falling asleep way too late, so all of the deep sleep I had in this moment was detected as awake time. As you can see in this plot right here, all of the deep sleep I had was detected as awake time, so I was already in bed a little bit after midnight, but the Huawei Watch 3 detected me falling asleep a little bit after 1. Sometimes deep sleep was also confused with being light sleep. Light sleep detection was also pretty bad, with only 40% of light sleep correctly detected. Light sleep was mostly confused with deep sleep. REM sleep detection is again the worst sleep stage, with only 1/4 of the REM sleep correctly detected. Most REM sleep was actually detected as being light sleep. Awake detection was slightly better for these nights. However, similar to what we saw before, the Huawei Watch 3 detected me as falling asleep way too late one time as well, which is also not very good. And we can also see for this night right here that the Huawei Watch 3 detected a really long awake moment, which was actually a lot shorter. If we put the results for the Huawei Watch 3 based on the two different EEG devices side by side, we can see that they're very similar. On the left are the results for the Z Max and on the right for the Dream 2 EEG headband. we can see that the percentage of deep sleep and light sleep correctly predicted is about the same, and the same goes for the poor REM sleep detection. Only for the nights tracked with the Dream 2 EEG headband as a reference device does awake detection seem slightly better. However, with both devices we saw that based on the individual nights, a lot of extra awake time is detected that is not really there. So overall I would say that the Huawei Watch 3 is pretty bad at sleep tracking. To put that into perspective, let's see how some of the better sleep trackers perform. That is what I displayed here. On the top left we see the same plot as before, showing the performance of the Huawei Watch 3. On the top right we have the results for the Whoop strap. On the bottom left the Fitbit Inspire 2, and on the bottom right the Withings sleep analyzer, which you put under your mattress. As you can see, all these devices perform better for all sleep stages compared to the Huawei Watch 3, particularly when it comes to REM sleep tracking. All of these devices vastly outperform the Huawei Watch 3. Finally, let's see if the Huawei Watch 3 correctly predicts when I fall asleep and when I wake up. That is what is displayed here. For those nights I wore the Z-Max as the reference EEG device. On the vertical axis we have the days I tested the Huawei Watch 3, and along the horizontal axis is the time difference between the EEG device and the Huawei Watch 3 for waking up in yellow and falling asleep in blue. So a positive number means the detecting me as waking up or falling asleep later than in reality, and a negative number means the detecting me as waking up or falling asleep earlier. As you can see, the Huawei Watch 3 mostly detects me as waking up at the right time. However, there were two extremes. One time it detected me as waking up 30 minutes early, and another time it detected me as falling asleep 30 minutes too late. We see something similar when looking at the results based on the Dream 2 EEG headband as a reference. Most of the time the Huawei Watch 3 was more or less correct. However, one night it detected me falling asleep more than an hour later than I actually did. For the next set of tests, let's take a look at the heart rate accuracy of the Huawei Watch 3. To test the heart rate accuracy, I'll compare it to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, which is generally considered one of the most accurate consumer devices available for heart rate measurements. I wore both the Huawei Watch 3 and the Polar H10 ECG chest strap for 11 spinning sessions, 18 bike rides, 1 longboard ride and 9 weightlifting sessions. That way I can check my heart rate at different heart rate ranges and during different levels and types of movement. Let's start with the accuracy during spinning. Here I displayed an overview of the heart rate accuracy during spinning. Each dot here is a single heart rate measurement, with on the horizontal axis the value according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and on the vertical axis the value according to the Huawei Watch 3. The blue line indicates perfect agreement, so any measurement along this line had roughly the same value for the Polar H10 and the Huawei Watch 3. The red line indicates those measurements where the value according to the Huawei Watch 3 is half that of the actual value according to the Polar H10. The reason I added this line is because in the past I've seen that many devices measure half the actual heart rate when they make a mistake. The more measurements there are in a certain area, the darker black the color. As you can see, the Huawei Watch 3 performed pretty well during spinning, as most measurements are along the blue line. However, there are still some points away from the blue line. Let's have a look at the individual training sessions to see when these problems occur. Here you see the first spinning session. Along the horizontal axis we have the clock time, and my heart rate is along the vertical axis. In blue I plotted my heart rate according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and in red is my heart rate according to the Huawei Watch 3. As you can see, I took 5 short breaks in this spinning session where my heart rate would dip. For this first spinning session you can see that in general the Huawei Watch 3 and the ECG chest strap agree pretty well. However, there are some moments throughout the session where the Huawei Watch 3 shows some small disagreement, as you can see in this part of the training for instance. For this second spinning session we see something similar. In general there's a very good agreement, however there are some small moments of deviation. This third spinning session here again shows something similar, mostly pretty okay agreement with some small deviations. And this is also true for this fourth example right here, and also in this fifth example right here. Overall, these results are not bad. Next, let's take a look at cycling outside, which I recorded whilst commuting to and from work. If I cycle outside, there are many more bumps and I also tend to sweat a bit more in the sun, which might also influence the accuracy of the Watch 3. Let's take a look. Here we see an overview of those measurements, so a similar plot to before but now for cycling. As expected, the deviation between the Watch 3 and the ECG chest strap is now a lot bigger. Both above and especially below the blue line we see much more deviation. Let's take a look at some of the individual commutes to see why this is. Here we see the first bike ride. Again, in blue is the Polar H10 ECG chest strap and in red the Huawei Watch 3. As you can see, the overall patterns in my heart rate mostly match, however there are definitely some significant deviations. It seems that the watch can follow the broad patterns but not the details and the changes in my heart rate. And we see something similar for this second bike ride, though the results might be even worse. And also for this third bike ride right here, the results are not very good. Overall, we see more or less the same pattern for all bike rides. The general patterns in heart rate match, however the individual peaks and dips in heart rate are mostly missed by the Huawei Watch 3. Next, I briefly want to look at a longboard ride. This involves slightly less movement and bumpiness compared to cycling, so I expect this to be better. That is indeed what we see. Most of the peaks and dips in my heart rate are matching between the Huawei Watch 3 and the ECG chest strap, so this does appear to be a much easier task for the Huawei Watch 3 than cycling. To close off this section, I want to look at weightlifting. Now, weightlifting is notoriously difficult for wrist-worn devices because during weightlifting I flex the muscles and tendons near my wrist, and this makes it hard for a watch to accurately detect the sudden changes in my heart rate. Let's take a look. This is again an overview of my heart rate accuracy, but now for weightlifting. Of course, the average heart rate is much lower during weightlifting than during cardio workouts. As you can see, in the lower heart rate ranges, there's a pretty good agreement between the chest strap and the Huawei Watch 3. However, in the higher heart rate ranges, there are many points below the blue line, indicating that the watch detected a too low heart rate. Let's take a look why this is. Here we see an example weightlifting session. Again, in blue is my heart rate according to the chest strap, and in red is my heart rate according to the Huawei Watch 3. Here you can see there's a pretty big disagreement between both devices. The Huawei Watch 3 is not able to pick up on the increases in heart rate that accompany each set that I did. And we can see the same in this second training session right here, where it is able to follow the overall patterns in my heart rate, but not the peaks of each of the sets that I did. And we see the same in this final example right here that I wanted to share. Overall, the heart rate accuracy of the Huawei Watch 3 seems to be okay. It mostly follows along with the chest strap during spinning, and it was okay during longboarding. However, it really struggled while cycling and whilst weightlifting. Next, let's take a look at SpO2 or oxygen saturation. In really simple terms, this is the percentage of red blood cells in the bloodstream that contain oxygen. This can be important to measure because it can be used as an indication for several medical conditions. For instance, it can be used to 1. Detect sleep apnea, where you basically stop breathing for 30 seconds or more during sleep. 2. Keep track of lung diseases. And 3. Potentially detect respiratory infections such as COVID-19. In all these cases, your blood oxygen saturation can drop from anywhere from the low 90% to 60%. Normal ranges, on the other hand, are generally between 95 and 100%. Let's first have a look at the range of SpO2 values the Huawei Watch 3 measured at ground level, which should not give very low measurements. I did this by measuring my SpO2 in the morning and evening at ground level. In total, I took 78 measurements. At the same time, I also took measurements with a dedicated SpO2 monitor. On the left here are the values measured by the Huawei Watch 3, and on the right the values measured with a dedicated finger pulse oximeter. As you can see, the Huawei Watch 3 generally measured SpO2 values in roughly the same range as the finger pulse oximeter, which is pretty good, so most are in a normal range. We do see one really low measurement of 93%, but otherwise this first analysis is looking good. Next, to see if the Huawei Watch 3 can detect a low oxygen saturation, I measured my oxygen saturation during 2 flights. In flight, the pressure in the cabin is decreased, thereby leading to a lower concentration of oxygen in the air, which in turn lowers the oxygen in my blood. Here you can see how during the flight my oxygen saturation decreased. On the horizontal axis we have the clock time, and on the vertical axis the oxygen saturation. You can clearly see the moment the plane ascended and my oxygen saturation decreased, and later the plane descended again and my oxygen saturation values returned to normal. And we can see something similar for the second flight right here. My oxygen saturations were normal when we were taxiing. When the plane ascended, my oxygen saturation values decreased, and when we descended again, my oxygen saturation values returned back to normal. If we now plot the values according to the Huawei Watch 3 as green dots in the same plot, we get these results. As you can see, the overall patterns of the Huawei Watch 3 seem to agree somewhat with those of the finger pulse oximeter, with somewhat lower values during the flight and somewhat higher values before the flight. However, even before the plane took off, there were already some lower measurements. We get the same mixed results for the SpO2 measurements during flying for the second flight, with some low but also some high values during the flight itself, where the values are supposed to be low. To put this into perspective, let's plot the range of values I measured at ground level next to this, and I display that in the plot on the left here, which is the plot I showed you before as well. As you can see, most of the values at ground level were higher than those taken in the air, which indicates that the Huawei Watch 3 is at least partially able to detect a lower oxygen saturation. Now, if we make a similar plot for the second flight as we made for the first flight, we see something similar. There are some values which are a lot lower than the values I measured at ground level, but there are some values which are relatively high and in my normal range, even though they're supposed to be low when I'm flying. So again, this is far from perfect. Overall, the oxygen saturation measurements of the Huawei Watch 3 at least appear to be able to sometimes detect a significantly lower SpO2 value. However, some other devices have definitely performed better when it comes to SpO2 measurements. While I was cycling outside, I also recorded my route using the Huawei Watch 3's built-in GPS. In this video, I want to show you how well the GPS signal was acquired and how well it followed along with the roads I cycled on. Specifically, I want to see how well it tracks my path by cycling the same path multiple times and seeing how well the different recordings overlap. First, I want to look at the GPS tracking that was recorded for 5 times I cycled to work. I always initiated the GPS tracking the moment I started cycling, and if we take a look at the clustering of the starting points, we see they're mostly clustered together. However, here we see for one bike ride it took a lot longer for it to acquire a signal. Now the reason I tracked multiple bike rides following roughly the same route is because then we can check how consistent these are. If the GPS is very accurate, the routes should be very consistent. Zooming in, we see the lines are somewhat close together, but they're definitely not perfect. We see that often it didn't perfectly follow the road I took, but it actually goes through different buildings. Now sometimes the lines are a lot closer together, as we can see here. However, very occasionally we see some weird artifacts. So I definitely cycled to this ADM machine right here. However, afterwards I followed the same road back. However, the GPS tracking has me going through some buildings to get back to the same route. Also here, these lines are supposed to perfectly overlap, but there's quite a big deviation between all of them. The moment I stop the GPS tracking is again pretty close, so I have somewhat mixed feelings about this. Next, let's take a look at 5 times I cycled back from work. And again, I initiated GPS the moment I left from work, and you do see some deviation for the time it would take for it to get a GPS signal. Looking at this part of the route here, we do see that the lines are pretty close together. So for this first part of cycling back, the results seem to be a bit better. Overall, the lines are much closer and they also follow the roads much better. So based on this, I have a bit more confidence in the GPS tracking. Also a quick side note, Huawei does not allow you to export the data in a common format. So I actually quickly wrote some code to convert the Huawei data into GPX files that can be loaded into Google Maps. I'll link that code below. The Huawei Watch 3 also features a step counter. To see if this counts my steps accurately, I went out and took exactly 4,000 steps in segments of 1,000 steps. To get an accurate step count, I manually counted my steps using this tally counter. Let's take a look at those results. As I mentioned, for the step counting test, I went out and I took 4 times exactly 1,000 steps. I wore the Watch 3 on my right arm and I alternated holding the tally counter in my left and right hand for each of the sets of 1,000 steps, which is what the right and left labels refer to right here. Now these are the actual steps counted by the Huawei Watch 3 when I was wearing it on my right arm, and as you can see they were pretty close to the actual 1,000 steps I took for each of the 4 segments. However, the Huawei Watch 3 did tend to overcount my steps, but not drastically. Just to put it into perspective, here are the steps counted by the Galaxy Watch 4 I wore at the same time. As you can see, both performed about equally well, though the Huawei Watch 3 might have performed slightly better. Also, the Galaxy Watch 4 tends to undercount, whereas the Huawei Watch 3 tends to overcount. Overall, the step counting of the Huawei Watch 3 is pretty good, or at least it counts the correct number of steps while walking. However, I still need to check if it counts any false positive steps. With that I mean, does it count any steps when it's not supposed to count steps, for instance while cycling or weightlifting? Overall, I'm not very satisfied with the performance of the Huawei Watch 3. The sleep tracking was really bad and I could not really rely on any of the metrics that come from it. The heart rate tracking is okay, it mostly follows along with the chest strap during spinning and it was okay during longboarding. However, it really struggled while cycling and also while weightlifting. There are definitely better devices out there when it comes to heart rate tracking. The SpO2 tracking was not terrible, though definitely not great. Sometimes it was able to detect a lowered oxygen saturation, but sometimes it was not. The GPS tracking did appear to work pretty okay. Finally, the step counting was also pretty okay. So, should you buy the Huawei Watch 3? Well, the Huawei Watch 3 is really beautiful and the menu and interface look good too. However, it is not cheap and the sleep tracking and health features are not great. For me, sleep tracking and heart rate monitoring are the most important features. Given the poor performance of the sleep tracking and the average performance of the heart rate monitor, I cannot recommend this watch. Take the Mi Watch for instance, it's about 1/3 of the price but performs better overall. If you're just interested in tracking your heart rate during exercise, I would recommend a chest strap like the Polar H10 to get a more reliable result. If you're an iPhone user and want the most accurate heart rate tracking from a watch, then I'd recommend an Apple Watch. If you want the best sleep tracking from a watch, get a Fitbit device like the Fitbit Luxe, Fitbit Charge 5 or the Fitbit Inspire 2. The Withings Sleep Analyzer, which you put under your mattress, also performs reasonably well. The Whoop strap has good heart rate tracking and sleep tracking, however this is a subscription service so can be significantly more expensive in the long term. I personally still prefer the Mi Watch over the Huawei Watch 3. And if you want to see that review, check out this video right here. As always, it helps the channel if you subscribe, like and comment, but it's totally up to you. Regardless, I hope to see you in the next video and have a great day.